Hi everybody, I'm Rick Beato. Jimmy Chamberlin is known for his dynamic and complex drumming style and has been a fundamental part of the Smashing Pumpkins sound since the band's beginning in the late 80s. From the intricate rhythms of cherub rock to the explosive beats of Bullet with Butterfly Wings, his influence on modern drumming is undeniable. When I used to produce bands, I would tell drummers, "It needs a Jimmy Chamberlin fill here." And they would know exactly what I meant. I got a chance to visit him at his home studio in Chicago a couple weeks ago. Here's my interview. Jimmy, welcome.
Thanks, Rick.
I mean, I'm saying welcome. I'm at your place.
Yeah. Welcome to Chicago.
Thank you.
Well, Riverwood's technically.
We actually just talked for the last 2 hours or so, so there's really nothing more to say here.
That's right. We've covered all the bases already.
So you're from a family of 6 kids, is that right?
That's right.
And you're the youngest?
That's right.
And we were talking about your influences by your siblings, about kind of your musical influence, diverse musical influence. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Youngest of 6. My dad, was born in 1925 and grew up very much in, the beginning of the American jazz songbook, the swing era. So, my dad also played clarinet. So a lot of Benny Goodman, Artie Shaw, Pete Fountain, Harry James, Duke Ellington, Count Basie. So probably my earliest music was big band. And really what started attracting me to the drums probably before I even realized it was, guys like Papa Joe and Krupa, Buddy Rich, with the Dorsey Band.
Yeah.
But being the youngest of 6, my brother Paul is a drummer. I had a drum set downstairs, and when he wasn't home, I would get on the drum set and play. And he would come home and throw me off. And then one day he realized that throwing me off wasn't working anymore, and then he just introduced me to a teacher when I was 8, and I started taking lessons. But just by proximity of where my bedroom was in relationship to my sister Laura, my sister Nancy, my brother Paul being a drummer kind of introduced me to the broad strokes of who he was listening to.
Was he taking lessons at the time?
He wasn't. He was self-taught.
Okay.
But his rival in Joliet was Charlie Adams, who plays with Yanni now, and was very much a proper student who took drums at Bill Crowden's Drums Limited.
Why did your brother tell you should take lessons, but he didn't take lessons?
I don't know. It's interesting, I think maybe just to get me off his back,
So he wouldn't have to teach you, right?
So he wouldn't have to answer my dumb questions, about paradiddles and stuff. Yeah, so my brother was very much into, Jeff Beck Group, David Garibaldi, Ian Pace, Deep Purple, Zeppelin, of course, The Who. So the kind of broad strokes of what it was to be a rock drummer back then, right? But also had, was into Narada Michael Walden and the Mahavishnu stuff early on, before I kind of was. Bobby Caldwell from Captain Beyond, who became a huge influence for me, and I'm always surprised at how few people know who that is as a drummer. So I kind of learned, that part of drumming from him. My sister Laura, on the other hand, who wasn't a musician, was really, I would say, had a more kind of sophisticated palette. And Laura was the type of person that would drive around in her Ford Maverick listening to the AM radio WBEZ in Chicago. Marty Fay was the famous DJ at the time, and he would play everything from Mose Allison to Thad Jones and Mel Lewis. He was playing great sides of music back then. A lot of the songbook of bop. So Laura had all of these crazy records in her collection, including like all the Steely Dan, all the Ricky Lee Jones. So I learned about the obvious drummers from my brother Paul, but Laura she was the person that really got me into the finer points of how drumming fits into a narrative. And she was the one who first sat me down and made me listen to Jim Gordon, like Low Spark of High Heel Boys, or like the first Ricky Lee Jones record.
How did she know?
No one knows.
That's so...
It's such a crazy, she's not with us anymore, and it's crazy, and I'm like, it's easy for me to get teared up talking about this, but it's crazy how much impact she had and continues to have on my drumming, because she really taught me that it's really not about the homogeny, it's about the inconsistency, and it's about the nuance that makes everything 100% better than everything else, right? It was the the way Jim Gordon didn't play like anybody else.
Right.
And the way, you know, Mel Lewis played big band, and the way like Mose Allison played piano, and Joe Pass and John Guerin, right? I mean, Steve Gadd. I heard Steve Gadd for the first time in my sister's bedroom. Rick Murata, another drummer. And she was just one of these people who was like, she was tuned in to like horns and drums. Like my old school Steely Dan, like listen to that horn part, right? With the baritone sax
But she wasn't a musician.
But she wasn't a musician. She was just.
Where did that come from?
You know, I think it was largely environmental, and it was really, you know, she hit that sweet spot in music where, you know, she was very much into Hendrix. Mm-hmm. My oldest sister Patty was very much into the Beach Boys. So, you know, I heard a lot of Hal Blaine in the house.
Okay.
Age of Aquarius, like, you know, that stuff. My sister Nancy was very much into the Temptations, Marvin Gaye, Bill Withers, that type of stuff. So as a kid, I mean, there was really no, you know, we talked about it, there was no genre allegiance in my house.
Right.
And my mom would listen to everything from Frank Sinatra, like a nauseating amount of Frank Sinatra, Only the Lonely, like on repeat till you want to shoot yourself. At any point, if you walked through my house, you could hear like Moonglow with Charlie Christian coming out of one speaker, and like Are You Experienced coming out of another one, and like Dance of the Maya coming out of my brother's bedroom, and like, you know, Psychedelic Shack. Once I started to play the drums, I realized kind of early on that it was kind of what I was after as a young person was really a way to articulate my emotions, right? Because, and without being able to articulate that as a destination, I can reverse engineer my thought process now and go, oh, as a young kid in a large family who didn't really have a voice.
Didn't have a voice because you were the youngest.
Right.
Yeah.
And I was getting beat on all the time, right?
Sure.
I had 3 sisters that could beat my ass, which wasn't fun. Or they would tickle me till I would vomit, right? I mean, you had brothers, right? 7?
For 7, I'm second youngest, and I had a sister Pat and I have a sister Pat and a sister Nancy.
Yeah, they could probably always go clobber you. Yeah. So I think for me, when I kind of think about like why, you know, I was so attracted to drums, it was a way for me to voice my opinion and to talk emotionally without anybody having the ability to counterpoint it.
This first drum teacher of yours, was this something that you pursued for a long time? Did you always take lessons?
I took lessons from the time I was 8 till about the time I was 13 or 14.
Well, did you start with rudiments, things like that?
Stick control, George Lawrence Stone.
Playing with a practice pad, or would you play drum set, or would you just actually...
I just had a snare drum.
Just a snare drum?
I got a snare drum, and then my brother gave me his 68 Sonar kit when he got his Clear Fibes kit.
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So, and that was my kit for a long, long time until I earned enough money with that drum set to buy a Ludwig Classic, I think when I was 14 or 15, because I had started playing professionally pretty early. I played in a polka television show and a polka radio show and any gig I could get, you know, but I could make a lot more money playing those gigs than I could with a paper route. So
did you like learning rudiments and that, or were you frustrated that you weren't working on drum set at first?
Yeah, I think I was frustrated like any drummer because it's hard, right? It's really effing hard to do that stuff, you know, all day long. And it's not, there's not a lot of meat on the bone for a young kid who just wants to beat the shit out of something.
Yeah.
But I stuck with it till it started to make sense. And one of the things that Charlie got me into was he was really good at expressing or articulating the musicality of rudiments, right? So he would point, like one of the first things we were talked about flams one day, right? I'm a big flams guy. Mm-hmm. And he said, in my spiral notebook where he used to draw stuff and write little pieces of music, he wrote the second drum fill from South Side of the Sky. Count, right? 2 flams, 3 kick drums.
Yeah.
So he had a good way of pointing out, you know, the utility of why we're doing this.
Right.
He also put me through the Paul Capozzali book, so Around the Drums with Triplets, Around the Drums with Open Rolls, Around the Drums with Paradiddles, which still used today. There's probably a copy. There's a copy of Syncopation right there, Ted Reed on my piano, which you know I'm using that as a Dawson thing to play swing patterns and using that to play kick drum. And I mean I'm a bit of still a practice nerd. Mm-hmm. I have a teacher, this guy, Steve Lyman in New York, is an incredible jazz independence guy who gives me like 3 months of stuff that I can't do, and I come down here and just eat shit for hours. But I know that there's a destination, and I can see that by working on my independence, it makes my day gig way, way better.
I'd like to take a second to talk to you about this channel. Believe it or not, 57% of the people that watch here regularly are not subscribed. So I would encourage you to hit the subscribe button now. This will help me get even more of my dream guests in the future. Thank you. So Jimmy, when you're practicing rudiments, right, then would you go and learn tunes off records?
Yes.
And practice to records?
Yes.
Would you actually crank the records up and wear headphones and then and play? What would you do?
I cut the speaker. So we had an old Silvertone that I convinced my parents to take it downstairs by my drum set.
Okay.
I cut the speaker wires and cut my headphone jack off, and I wired my headphones to that thing so I could play with headphones on.
Nice.
And then I stole all my brothers and sisters' records, and I learned every one of them, right?
So you would just teach yourself all the beats, right?
Yeah.
And how would you incorporate the stuff that you were learning in your lessons? Would you know if somebody was doing a single stroke roll versus if they
Eventually you'd figure it out, yeah. I mean, because, you know, you'd hear somebody doing long rolls, you know, or
like a Motown, a 6-stroke roll or something like that.
Right, you hear that stuff, right? Yeah, and you'd hear, you know, Benny playing that stuff or whatever. You would try to figure out how to approximate it first. You can approximate a lot of that stuff with single stroke rolls, right? As long as the accents land where the accents land, but as you get older and you start getting into, you know, the 5-stroke, 7-stroke rolls, 6 strokes, I mean, you start to realize like, oh, there's an easier way through the door, and that's kind of what the deal with these rudiments is, right? And I still, when people see me play, they're like, wow, you do a lot of paradiddles, right? And I do, like, when most guys do like a ticka 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 ticka, I do ticka 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 ticka. You know, I still play that stuff. Like in Geek USA, those big open rolls are paradiddles, right? Because they sound better.
Yes, yes.
They sound better because they're ticka 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 ticka, as opposed to ticka 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 ticka.
Yeah, like they have a certain flow to them that doesn't sound.
And coming from big band, or coming from Krupa, when you listen to you start to understand that the role of rudiments is allow you a palette to apply nuance to things, right? And it's not just kind of, you know, this stuff, which works, you know, when you're playing Fireball by Deep Purple or, you know, Pace, I mean. But what's funny about like Ian Pace and Bonham, very much big band guys.
Totally.
Very much big band. When you watch Bonham play, he's playing a lot of doubles. You watch Pace play, he's buzzing his singles like Buddy.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of that bass drum stuff, you know, Don Lombardi and I, Don from DW is one of my dear drumming buddies, as much of a nerd as I am. And when we get together, it's always hours. One day we were in his office and we were just, he had a board tape of Buddy's, and we just listened to the bass drum.
Right.
For the whole concert. They played the drums. They played the instrument for the things the drums needed to be at that time.
They also tuned, like John Bonham's tunings are more like a bebop drummer.
That's right. Very high.
Very high tunings, huge drums, but high tunings.
Yeah.
And they gave him a really individual sound and a melodic sound, I think.
But I think, and you'll appreciate this, right? As a drummer, one of the things that drummers need to be aware of that some of them aren't is the architecture in which you're inserting drums. If you try to take John Bonham's sound and play it in the Smashing Pumpkins,
no way.
You're not going to hear it.
No,
there's no usable frequencies in there. But Zeppelin was essentially a trio.
People don't realize, that's right. And Jimmy Page's guitars were very small.
Very thin.
Very thin.
And the only thing that
not in a bad way.
No, and John Paul Jones was a very plucky bass player, and the only thing that really had density was the B3, right?
Yeah.
So you got away with murder with those drums. I mean, I brought Ludwig's in here thinking like, oh, this is going to be great, right? And it's great until you put stuff on it and you realize like, oh, these things really need to kind of be in a big band, or they really need to be in a place where these frequencies are usable. That's why like the Yamaha stuff just works for me, because there's especially like these Birch kit, you know, it sounds good in after Corgan's done putting 24 guitar tracks on, you can still hear the drums.
Now with Birch kits, have a different sound than maple kits do.
Yeah.
Like to me, they have more of low mids or something.
Yeah, a little more high end, a little more high articulation, and a little more low mid, which is what I like because I don't like the bunchy. I play some maple kits, and some of them are great, but some of them are just bunchy in the mids.
Explain that for people, because this is kind of nerd talk.
So the tone that's coming out of the drum bunches up in the mid range, which is between like 500 and 900.
Yeah.
And that's okay if you're playing in a certain type of band. If you're playing bluegrass music, that stuff works great.
Yeah.
But in a dense rock band,
that's where the guitars are, and then you end up dumping it out.
Right.
And so you may as well play a different.
Right.
Maybe we'll play different shells.
Right, and if you take an equalizer on a song that's already recorded and you turn those levels up, you're just going to hear vocal.
Right.
So, which, I want to hear drums. So that's why I play these, because I'm in a range where, there's not much.
So your tom setup that you have here, right? You have the big tom, then you have the two.
14, 10, 13, 16, 18.
Okay, so how do you arrive at that with basically like a floor tom here, but it's not quite as deep as a floor tom would be?
So a couple things.
Yeah.
Corgan, there used to be a commercial on in Chicago called Starbeat.
Okay.
Starbeats presents What's Happening. And it was on everybody who lived in Chicago, especially Billy and I, who were up late at night.
Right.
Saw this commercial.
Okay.
And it was all for bands that were playing like the Holiday Star Theater, like bands that had kind of come and gone, right?
Yeah.
It had this thing. And then we both knew the Starbeat drum fill. And one day Corgan said, like, I had played something similar to the Starbeat drum fill, and he was like, no Starbeat drum fill, please. And I was like, oh my God, you can't, you're right. But he had suggested at one point moving the toms around to have some more tonal configurations.
Yeah.
And because he had played with this guy, Ron Rosing, who had a similar kind of janky setup. For me, it was more about, we had that song, I Am One.
Yes.
For
first
me.
song on the first record.
Yeah, you did your homework.
Well, it starts with a drum beat.
It does.
I mean,
course.
it's really
as
a
all
classic.
Good records do.
As all good records do. But that's the introduction into Smashing Pumpkins starts with the drums.
Same with Siamese, right?
Yes, that's right. So I Am One, continue.
I don't get more money for that. So I Am One used to be a paradiddle on my floor tom.
Okay.
Right? So
yeah.
Just a paradiddle. And sometimes it would invert, sometimes not. I didn't feel like the paradiddle was a good, what I wanted to hear. Like I was hearing too much nuance in the thing. I wanted
you wanted to more rock.
I want to be more like Don Brewer, right?
Yeah.
Like, what would Don Brewer do?
Yeah.
So that's where when we recorded it, that's where that kind of took over. And then once I started to get into the kind of more jungle drum stuff that we were doing, because we had a ton of jungle drum B-sides, right?
Yeah.
In fact, there's one famous song called Lucky 13, where at the end of the song you can hear me say, I'm not playing any more jungle drums.
Okay, so this, that's 14 by 12? What is that?
Yes.
14 by 12. Now, to mount that there and to move that around, when you first put that on, it's kind of a weird position to be in, isn't it?
It is.
So tell me about that. Like, was that strange to get used to?
No, because here's how I look at it, right? I still look at this as like a big band 5-piece.
Okay.
So when I'm playing in my 14s over here, I'm a little bit like this. So my bass drum's a little bit over here, but I'm playing snare 14, 16, 18.
Yeah.
Right? So it's still kind of my same Sonar kit, which used to be snares 13, 2 16s.
Yeah.
So it's still very much a 5-piece kit, like I play like with my straight ahead gig. These drums I look at like a little bit more kind of percussive, more kind of accoutrement. I mean, now it's just my instrument.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of mind hurdle that you had to get around to kind of play it. What it does do is it moves your hi-hat way back.
Yeah.
So that gets to be a pain in the ass.
Is that awkward to do?
It is. And I spent years with my foot back here playing.
Yeah.
And now, thanks to the magic of new technology, I have these cable hats, so I'm able to put the cymbals where I want them and have the pedals like this.
Yeah.
And that's why I, not recently, but a few years ago, was able to start playing double pedal. Because before, I mean, if you wanted to play double pedal, you're playing like this.
Right.
Because of that big honking tom over it. And the old stands were like,
yeah. I mean, drum technology
stands.
has come a long way.
Yes.
With the stands and bass drum pedals, things like that have come a long way.
And this is a 2002 kit. This is back when Sakai Rhythm still made Yamaha. Those guys were like family members for me. Hagi, who was running Yamaha at that time, was like a family member. I mean, I was I've been to that factory many, many times. I sat with Hagi many times and talked about hardware, and we had a big R&D group at Yamaha at one point, me, JR, Dave Weckel. When I got signed to Yamaha, I had already bought a Yamaha kit because Elvin was on Yamaha,
right.
and Roy Haynes was on Yamaha,
yeah.
and Vinny was on Yamaha.
Right.
So everybody everybody I cared about was on Yamaha. Back then, they weren't giving endorsements out. Like, there wasn't a lot of rock guys on Yamaha. They were jazz nerds.
Yeah.
My manager reached out to who was Steve Edelson, was the A&R guy at that point, and he said, yeah, Jimmy will take a look, and see what he's doing. And so I told Steve, I said, look, I'm cool with the endorsement and I'd be flattered, but I'm going to play Yamaha anyway. I'm not playing them because I want an endorsement. I'm playing them because these guys play them and they sound great.
Right.
So he said, well, come on in and we'll talk. And so back then when you went and got an endorsement, it wasn't like, hey, let's see how many Facebook friends you have or how many, what your TikTok profile is.
Right.
You went into a room, a guy talked to you, he's got a suit on, and I knew Steve was a drummer. He played on Name That Tune or something. He was like, studio guy, right?
Yeah.
So he goes, okay, well, let's walk over here. So we walk into a room, and there's like a red birch like fusion kit on the ground, and there's like 4 Japanese guys in suits with their arms crossed. And he goes, okay, go ahead and play.
Oh my
and I'm
God.
like, play what? Right? Just play. So you get in there and you blow some chops and you try to burn the house down, and guys are shaking their head, or you see them talking to each other, and I'm nervous as hell, right? No, I don't even want the endorsement now. I just want to get the hell out of the room.
Right.
But luckily, it all worked out, and I got the deal, and I've been back and forth a couple times to Yamaha, but we're kind of joined at the hip, and they're such a part of the Pumpkin sound that I don't think there's any doubt that they're going to take me to the finish line.
I was thinking that the old Recording Customs had a massive the post that went through the
Double
bass drum.
tension lug. Yeah. Oh yeah, right.
Now this is much more practical. It's a smaller post and everything. Why did they have that on that big post that went through that?
Well, don't forget that the Recording Custom toms back then were all square toms. The 12s were 12 by 12.
That's right.
Right. So and the drums had those big heavy lugs on them. So it's a lot to put 2 toms on a bass drum like that without it flexing.
These were all the things that had to be overcome over the years. People don't realize this about drum hardware.
So it got so crazy that I called up Joe Testa and I said, look, I was making the first Complex record, and Dave Weckel had lent me his birch kit. He said, I was coming to Pasadena. Dave said, oh, my kit's at SIR, just use mine. Oh, awesome. So I was like, why does Dave's kit, it's got the same problem as mine. His 12-inch, his kit had a 12-inch tom there. And the reason I used a 13 is because the 12-inch tom was phase canceling with the hardware. So you would pick up the drum and it would sound great, and then you would put it on the mount and doom, doom, doom. So we had this whole shitstorm at Yamaha, right?
That's crazy.
Because now Weckel is in complete agreement. Like, we're the only 2 people who are waving a white flag.
Right.
Hang on.
Yeah.
So Hagi comes and he sees, I had a kit with a 12, but now I got the kit on its own stand, a cymbal stand, off to the side, and that's what got this. Hagi invented this system, this Yes system, that they still use on an airplane napkin on the way back to Japan. Because when the rod would go through the drum, the harmonic of the rod, the frequency of the rod would eat the phase of the drum, and you'd have phase cancellation.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So we would get, these people would be like, who is this, right? I mean, we would get that nitpicky about the drums.
You don't use any deadening in your bass drum.
Nope.
Have you always been like that?
I mean, back in the old days when it was, we were playing the Metro, you had to have a pillow in your bass drum. But
when you recorded Gish, was there nothing inside the bass drum then?
Well, here's what we did with Gish. I had a 22-inch bass drum, and we took everything out of the bass drum, and Butch made a foam tunnel.
Yeah.
So that's what we did back in the end. You put the RE20 at the end, right?
Yeah.
And you had, a couple mics in close. So I don't think we used any muffling, but we attacked it from another.
Okay, actually explain to people why you used the foam tunnel.
Yeah, so you just want to be able to elongate the availability of the frequency, right? Because low frequencies are very long. That's why when a car drives by, you can hear the bass notes coming through your house, because if the wall's not thick enough to stop the frequency, which could be this long or as long as this room, it will just simply go through whatever it is. So in order to facilitate the capturing of the low end, you create a delivery vehicle to the microphone.
Right, and so the mic is placed back here. There's a tunnel, and the tunnel also serves to take the cymbal spill out.
A little bit, yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah, because cymbals are always...
This is an old school recording technique, though.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. And Butch is from the old school of recording. When I interviewed him, we talked about these kind of things.
He loves this shit.
I love this too. So, but there's nothing.
There's nothing in that bass
in your bass drum. This bass drum is 22.
It's a 20 by 16 or 20 by 18. Yeah.
Okay, but you prefer what?
22 by 14.
Okay.
And I use nothing in it. It's like a big band drum.
Now, we talked about this earlier, about the theory of having a more shallow
The
bass
longer
drum.
the distance, the more time it takes from the batter head to get to the sympathetic head, the resonant head.
Yeah.
Right? And what happens in a bass drum is when you hit the head, the sound goes like this. It goes this way, and it hits the side of the shell, and then it goes this way. And if it doesn't get to the head, it hits the shell again, and then it goes this way again.
Exactly.
So with the shallower bass drum, what ends up happening, it hits the shell and it hits the resonant head, and you get some back, right?
Yeah.
So that's why, and I think, going back to the way that I heard bass drums, whether it was, Cozy Cole or
they were all
Billy
14
Higgins.
inch. They were all 14-inch deep.
Yeah.
Those bass drums.
It's the classic sound.
Yes.
And it's really comes down to and it's a little easier to play because you're getting a little bit of, it's like putting a good exhaust on a car.
Yeah.
You get a little bit of that back pressure.
Yes.
That
and
increases
it makes
the
a difference with your foot.
It does.
When you're doing those really fast things, we talked about Jelly Belly, which is one of my favorite drum parts of yours.
Wait, you said you wouldn't talk about Jelly Belly.
I'm going to talk about Jelly Belly. That it's got the super fast bass drum. I mean, it's an incredibly hard beat.
It's impossible.
And you did that all with one.
That was a single
pedal.
Yeah, it's not anymore, folks. But it used to be. Yeah, I used to play that with one pedal. And that song was so difficult to record.
Yeah.
And Flood loved it. He thought that song. We were going to pick that song for our first single. One
of the hardest things to do is to write a great up-tempo song. And Smashing Pumpkins has a lot of great up-tempo songs. And that's an incredibly melodic song that has all these great riffs, and it has the killer drum part.
Yeah.
Why didn't you have it as your first single?
Maybe because we probably wouldn't be sitting here right now.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
That was us, not the record company. We in our defense, we had an ally at the record company at that time that we really, really trusted, Phil Corderero, and who's no longer with us, but was really kind of our ace in the hole for a long time, because Phil's musical understanding was really just beyond anybody, apart from like an Elliot Roberts or like that level of a musical savant. In fact, Phil had received the songs, the Melancholy rough mixes with no vocals in them, and still was able to pick the first 5 singles without hearing any vocals. Which is, I couldn't have done that. Billy couldn't have done that. That's like my sister Laurel. Like, where does it come from, right? But yeah, Jelly Belly was such an incredibly hard song to play, and Flood loved it so. And so every day we would come to practice or to the studio, which was our rehearsal space, and we were set up in a circle. I was here, Billy was opposite me, Darcy was over here, and James was here. And before anybody did anything, because we figured out the hard way, like if so-and-so eats a cheeseburger before we got to track this fucker, like it's not going to happen, right? Or if somebody, right? You see the blood sugar go up, down, and then all of a sudden, like the bass pocket's weird, and you're like, what's going on? Like, how many Diet Cokes did you drink, right? So before anything happened, we would try to play Jelly Belly every day. Okay, before anything, or Ode to No One, like those songs. Like we would try to play those songs, and it was always, like, the car on the ice skittering down the highway out of control, and you just try to capture that one version of it. And that day it just happened to be where nobody made any mistakes, because generally when we would record, we were recording straight to tape, no click, no editing. So the drum part had to be the drum part. There was no ability to go back and fix anything.
Right.
Everything the Pumpkins ever recorded, from Gish to Zeitgeist, was straight to tape, no click.
Okay.
Commando, right? Like all commando, with the idea that we're going to keep the drum track and we're probably going to replace everything else.
Right.
Every once in a while we would keep something, but not usually. So, but with the drums, with everybody set up in a circle and the drums pumping through, we had a full PA, the bleed, if somebody made a mistake, would come through.
Sure.
So now you're not only driving your bus, you're trying to mentally drive everybody else's bus. Like you're looking at so-and-so who made a mistake yesterday, or Billy screwed this part up, or I screwed a part up. You know, you're thinking like, oh my God, this is so intense. But you hear it now when I listen to that song, which, you know, I didn't listen to it a lot back then because it was so painful. But you listen to it now and you hear the freneticism is...
It's amazing.
What
That's
Flood
what's
understood
that
I didn't understand.
Youth, you know, that energy.
Insanity.
Yeah. Going back to Gish, when you recorded Gish, had you been in studios very much before that?
No, I mean, you know, a couple times with the Pumpkins, and I had been, you know, made some polka records, which were great. I mean, if you want to learn how to play rudimentally, go play with an accordion player, because you got to play quiet and you got to play precisely and you got to play fast. You know, I mean, the beer barrel polka may sound like a joke to most people, but it ain't a joke to the drummer.
It's not.
So no, I didn't have a lot of recording experience. In fact, I was, you know.
Did it drive you nuts to get drum sounds and things like that? Do you think like, God, why does this take so long?
I kind of, I mean, you know Butch. I mean, you know Butch. So Butch makes it like, you know, Butch is a drummer, so you become kind of brothers in arms.
Yeah.
The Gish sessions, by nature of economics, didn't take that long. The drums were recorded in 2 days, and I think all of those songs, with the exception of Snail, are the first take. One take.
And where did you do that record?
At Smart Studios.
At Smart,
yeah.
Butch's place.
It was in a room, you know, Billy and I were in a room that's smaller than this.
That's in Madison.
We would set up his Marshall cabinet, you know, in an ISO cabinet. We'd have the headphones on, and he would be this close to me, and it would just be him and I, and Darcy and James would be in the other rooms playing bass and guitar, and we would just go for it. And we would rehearse so much, and we were playing live so much.
Would Billy even do a scratch vocal or no?
No vocals.
Just play.
No, we knew the songs, we knew the arrangements. So I knew where the solos were, I knew what solo was, I knew how I was going to articulate, how I was going to make room for stuff. Like we were always pretty greased up. Would you say that was the case for every record, that you would be really rehearsed, or would there be things where there are songs that weren't finished yet? Siamese
was like that, right?
Yeah,
that was a real tough,
like the
tough record.
back half of Geek.
Yeah,
wasn't even written. I mean, we only had the one part, so a lot of that stuff was done on the fly. Like I remember Butch saying, like, we need a fill going into the back half of Geek, and I was like, it was just one of those things where God just goes, here, I'm gonna give you one, but you ain't gonna get more, right? I mean, you know those moments where you're just like, you play something off the cuff and it becomes part of your identity, right, forever. So, which is the cool part about recording stuff like that, because you really, you know, it allows you to dabble outside of your comfort zone whilst knowing the destination. And I think that's where a lot of that energy comes from. And the recordings that I love, like we were talking about Passion Dance, right? Like that song, like the confidence in the destination allows the flexibility of the interpretation within the architecture, right? And that's how the Pumpkins recorded. Like, I don't think I ever played the same thing twice, like in a lot of those recordings. Like, I listened to Eye of the Morning because we were going to do it on tour off of Machina. And in my opinion, like, Machina is when the insanity between, like, my ability, Corgan's ability, how much just insane confidence we had, and also on the other side, how we knew that it was all going to end anyway. Right. Like, that's the record. That record
that's
really.
That's record 2000. It came out, I think.
Yeah.
Is that right?
And you know, right at the beginning of the Britney Spears, where we knew we saw the train was going, like it was done.
Beginning of the end for the music business.
We're like, okay.
And the boy bands and girl bands and all that things was you know, NSYNC and Backstreet Boys, all that stuff was going on then.
That's right. So you got a year to make the soundtrack for not the end of the world, for the end of your world.
Right.
Right. Right. So, you know, that's where that all culminated. But when I listen back to the stuff, it's like the relationship between the vocal and the ride cymbal is so intact. And there's so many mini conversations going on between Billy and I with the way he plays a chord or he hangs a chord, or what we would do a lot of times when we would play a verse is, because we were big like Cole Porter fans, right? And we would study like that stuff and think about like arrangementally, why do we have to wait for to change here? Like Billy and I would call it cutting the fat or screwing the ends in. Whenever the song was done, we would go back and say, okay, this doesn't need to be here, this doesn't need to be here, and we just screw the ends in until we couldn't screw them in anymore, and that would be the arrangement. But what ends up happening is through doing that, it's like the narrative reigns supreme, but it allows a framework for all these mini narratives, because the mini narratives are in on the story. They allow you to make these great choices within the context of the big plot, subtext-wise, right? So like any great, impressions or any great song that's, whether it's modal like that or it's extremely tempestrial in its arrangement, the confidence in the arrangement allows people to make better choices. And I do this live all the time, where Victor will tell you, aside from the big fills, I generally don't play the same stuff every night, ever.
But fills that people will recognize.
Yeah, right, like the Cherub Rock fills, whatever.
Right, you have to do that.
Yeah, I do all of that
right,
stuff.
I mean, and let's, wait, I want to just talk about that for a second. You do it because people actually recognize those fills, and they don't feel that the song is right without those, do you think?
That's a good reason to do it, but that's not the reason I do it.
Okay, why?
I do it because I still think that's the best choice.
There you go.
So if I come up with something better, I'll do it.
Are you playing these songs in a rehearsal space always before the record, or does Billy have demos of some songs?
Both, but
Okay.
we're generally playing them until we have a thing, right? You have to play them till they suck.
Okay.
And then you get back in there and figure out why. So you've got to put in that seat time, whatever the Malcolm Gladwell, whatever the shit is.
Yeah.
You got to go in.
10,000 hours.
You got to play, like Bosie always says, you play it, and then you go get a drink, and you come back and you can't play it. But after you can play it again, that's when you know it, right? So it's kind of like that with the arrangements. I remember we had when we did Zeitgeist with Roy at the Village.
Yep.
We had this song, Bring the Light. Just a ripping. Oh, the whole album is just ripping. Just a ripping tune. We had done 9 takes of the drums, and we had a front half that I really liked, and I loved this other back half. And Billy goes to Roy, let's just splice them. And the engineer goes, but you guys didn't record to a click. How are you going to do it? And we looked, and every version was
Exactly
the same time.
Of course.
Right?
Easy.
Right?
Yeah.
It was the same
Wait a
exact
minute,
time.
I didn't realize you guys did that at the Village. Did you do it in the D,
Yes.
in D?
Mm-hmm.
And
With
where
the
did
big
you
VR Neve?
Yes, and where did you set up the drums? Because they have that,
Right, with that
raised...
the crazy floor or the crazy ceiling thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, right in there.
Okay.
Yeah. But that was one drum set. So that was kind of our pop drum set.
Yeah.
The other drum set was up in the haunted Mason
On the top
Masonic
floor.
temple, where
Yeah,
the
yeah.
curtains would go like this at night.
That studio, D is pretty dry.
Yeah.
It's a very dry room compared to Triclops or other places that you recorded.
So we moved around a lot in that. We recorded some of the things at Cahuenga Pass.
Mm-hmm.
We recorded some of the rock drums at Sage and Sound, which was across from Ocean Way.
Right,
On
yeah.
Gower.
Yeah, Scour,
And
right.
Sunset, which had a big concrete bunker drum room. We recorded there, and we got some great drum sounds there.
You guys record around in a lot of different studios. That's particularly for the drum sound,
Yes,
right?
always. I mean, but to just going back to your question, did we know songs were going to be a hit?
Yeah,
Okay, the PC answer, no.
yeah.
But as you know, you have to know. You have to know. You have to know that it's all going to be a hit before you play it. I mean, or you have to be in love with it, like you would love something that's not necessarily lovable to everybody.
Now, a song like 1979 is so different than other songs that you had done at the time. Now, was that something that you thought, well, I don't know, how are people going to receive this song? You knew it was...
Had no idea.
Okay.
Had no idea on that one because that was so out of our wheelhouse.
Yes.
So that was really a flood flood experiment, and Flood,
Explain who Flood is.
So Flood is a producer.
Yeah.
And most famously worked with Brian Eno on YouTube.
Yep.
Worked a lot with Depeche Mode.
Yep.
Did PJ Harvey, Nine Inch Nails.
The band Curve that I love.
Yeah, Curve, right.
Yep.
Really known for his dark production.
Yeah.
And, you know, we were a dark band.
Yeah.
And, you know, Billy had met Flood. We were actually at a Nine Inch Nails party.
Okay.
It was a weird party for us. I remember Burton Cummings was at the party.
Okay.
So start there. Because I wasn't a studio nerd, I never looked at records and see who produced anything.
Okay.
I mean, I knew like George Martin and the guy who produced the Deep Purple records.
Right.
Whatever that guy's name was, right? You know, because Billy worked in a record store for many, many years. So his knowledge of liner notes was...
You can learn a lot by reading the back of records.
And he would tell me records that people that have done, and I'd be like, oh yeah, I love that record.
Yeah.
You know, but I never necessarily knew who the producer was. So when Flood showed up with Alan Moulder, who I'd known, you know, from Triclops days.
Yes.
You know, and Alan and I are very, you know, we were blood brothers back then. I mean, you know, Alan and I worked really closely together. It was obvious that Flood was going to make an unconventional record in an unconventional setting with a band that was really at loggerheads with their record company, because making a double CD on your third record is...
It's not the thing to do at the time, right?
Right. Everybody hated the idea, except for us, because Corgan wouldn't stop writing songs. I mean, he's like, if you leave him alone for long enough, he'll have a song when you come back. I mean, you can go out and get a sandwich. You know, I got a new... I mean, that's why we're going to Blackbird tomorrow or the next day, because he's like, hey, I went through the riff pile and there's a couple good riffs we got to go back and record, right? Then I'm not, you know, I never say no. I mean, I'm always like, hell yeah, let's do it, man. There's always more fun to be had. So, you know, Flood, he really allowed me in particular to explore and come to grips with what I was afraid of. Because he was really about, again, like all of the greats have the intuition they know to celebrate the inconsistencies and the things that are different, as opposed to hurting the homogeny.
Is 1979, is that played to a click?
Yes. It's played to a drum machine.
Played to a drum machine, right?
Or, and I could be wrong, because again, I didn't produce the song.
Yeah.
It could just be me playing a beat and then chopping it and making a loop and then creating a drum machine.
Because that's something that Flood would do. That was the thing that he did with U2, and they'd take a drum pattern and they would make loops. But this is before computers did that.
And on Machina, we did stuff like Raindrops and Sun Showers. That song, I played two drum parts. Doom cat to doom cat doom cat to doom cat, and then that doom doom da to get doom da over the top of it. So we made a loop out of my part. Then I had to play the song over the top of it, which to me, you know, having never played with a click before, I mean, that was really, it was tough, you know.
Okay, I want to go back to early on when you first started the studio sessions back way back with Gish, and about some of the technical things as far as like drum heads. What kind of drum heads would you use back then? And did Butch say, hey, we should use this thing? Did you have a drum tech on that record? Did you ever have drum techs on records, or you would always tune your own drums?
I never had drum techs on
Never
records.
had drum techs. Okay, so what drum heads would you play back then? Like what kind?
Whatever
what would you play in your snare?
the longest.
Okay.
So, right?
Because you play small beaded sticks.
Not back then. I was playing 2Bs or 5Bs.
Okay.
So I have 5Bs up until probably Machina, and then I went to the 5A. And now I use a MJ4, which is a maple jazz stick. I'd play whatever lasted long enough, you know, because I didn't have any money. My shoes didn't even have shoelaces in them because my shoes were used to hold snare wires on.
Okay, but back then, you're on a major label.
Not really, because we hadn't been signed yet.
Is that when you started Gish? You hadn't been signed yet?
Well, we kind of been signed, but we didn't get in advance. So what would happen is, we started playing in '88.
Yep.
We never spent any of the money. We put it in a pile, and everybody was left to fend for themselves, which is why I had to lie about working at a bike shop and all this other crap that went on. You know, I was sleeping under somebody's kitchen or dining room table for a while. I mean, it was poor. Billy and I was sharing cans of beefaroni. I mean, it was awful. So we had saved $30,000. And when we went to record Gish, that was our money. We paid for the money ourselves. And Virgin sent Phil Costello, who was the head of radio, and some other person from WEA. You remember WEA?
Yeah, of
WEA
course.
at the time.
Yeah.
Warner Electra and Atlantic.
Yep.
Who were the distributors, to come to Gish, to come to the studio and listen to Gish. And we were still not technically signed. So we paid for the album ourselves. So we were kind of like, we had a little latitude.
That's actually pretty advanced.
Yeah.
That's pretty smart for the time.
Well, you know, again, Corrigan worked in a record store, so he reverse engineered how a lot of these records that he liked got made, and how to keep, you know, the
Jimmy
tether.
Page paid for the first Zeppelin record.
Right. So there's a lot
precedent there.
There's a lot of information that he was in possession of that went into the ideology of the band. Thank God, you know, because I didn't know shit about that stuff. I do now, but I mean, I didn't know a lot about it. So with that, Phil Costello shows up one night, and we're kind of done. We're not done. We've got stuff to play, but we're not. Maybe vocals are still being done because we are who we are. He sits down and he wants to hear, you know, a song that's going to potentially be played on the radio. So, of course, we play him Window Pane with the 6-minute intro. Right. Bum, boom, gung, gung.
Oh, my God.
Right?
Right.
And when it kicks in, I looked over and it was like the Memorex commercial where he's just like this and the speakers are, and he's like, oh, my God, this is the greatest sound I've ever heard, right? And we knew we were kind of in the door at that point. But, yeah, it was dicey. You know, we had played for almost every major label and everyone said no.
That's actually a very common story.
I know, but when it's about you, it's your story.
Right, that's right.
And it can be dicey because we had all bet a lot on the band. Probably those guys more so than I, because I had you know, tons of stuff I could go and do as a drummer. But, you know, being a songwriter and those types of things, that's not where those guys wanted to land.
Going back to when you had your second record, when you did Siamese Dream in Atlanta at Triclops.
Yep.
It was a different kind of thing, right? Because you have a big budget.
Had a big budget.
You had a big budget.
Big egos.
Big egos. How did your gear change? Did you...
So, yes. When I joined the Pumpkins, I had a banana yellow Gretsch kit.
Right.
Which was my Tony kit, right? So,
yeah.
Those guys hated it. So once the music got to be more progressive and we started to play the stuff that was going to be on Gish, I needed a bigger drum kit. I needed the Erskine Weather Report drum kit.
Right, there you go.
So I traded a guy who worked at a music store in Detroit, my yellow Gretsch kit for his Pearl Birch kit. Okay. And it had 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, and the bass drum. And that's the kit that we ended up using on Gish.
Okay.
Yeah, so, and then that snare drum, which is, you know, the most, you know, everybody sampled that snare drum because Butch did such a great job. That was a Yamaha steel shell recording custom.
Really? Interesting.
I know, right?
You have that still or not?
Butch does. It was his.
Oh, man.
I know. I just talked to him not too long ago about it. He's like, oh, yeah, Jimster, I still got that drum. But, yeah, the drums sounded so good.
So good.
And the room being small, like this room, it kind of self-compresses, right? So it gives you a little bit of that back, like a little bit of that whomp back to where you can really kind of dig in. You can really lay into stuff without kind of overplaying or playing through it.
What do you use on your snare? What's your snare head?
Back then, it was probably a coated dot.
Okay.
Now I use an Emperor.
Okay.
I use coated Emperors on all of this stuff and Ambassador clears on the bottom, just because these drums are pretty lively. Yeah. You know, I play straight ahead because I use Ambassadors. Yeah. On everything. I'm an open guy, right? I want to hear drums. You have no deadening on anything, right? I have a little bit of moon gel on stuff, but that's about it. But, mostly on cymbals, believe it or not. So then we got to Atlanta, and I had my brand new Yamaha kit, and that thing was, you know, rocket ship. But a lot of snares, a lot of Ludwig snares. Would you use different snares for different songs? You have more time to experiment back then. Yeah, so like the Geek and some of those snares, some of those songs were used on Mark Richardson's 6.5 brass hammered brass, which he gave me after that session. Oh man. Yeah. And you have that still? I think so, yeah. Okay. And then, you know, a lot of Superphonics. I had a Radio King with the big stick crusher hoops. That was that was the verse snare on Today. Okay. So when the chorus comes down and it sucks down into the verse, that's at Radio King. And I think either we set 2 snare drums up or we spliced drum takes where we recorded the verse with the Radio King and the chorus with the Yamaha.
Talk about as far as ride cymbals. You and I were talking about dry ride cymbals and things like that, and having articulation, how it's important, especially when you play with really distorted guitars, to be able to hear the ride.
Yes.
And if you're bashing the ride, it just creates even more
murk,
more wash, and how it's important to actually articulate.
You know, the dark cymbal definition is a lifelong pursuit of mine. And I've talked to many, many drummers along the way in an effort to achieve it. And I feel like, you know, the Istanbul is probably as close as I've landed to it. But I like dark cymbals. For a while, in order to get my voice heard, I was using a Customs Zildjian, you know, very brash, very
brash. Yep.
That worked in that context. I used those on Siamese Dream. But when we started working on Melancholy, the Constantinoples were starting to come around, right? And I knew Lenny DiMuzio and those guys, and they knew that I was a cymbal nerd. I told Bill Zildjian this, but I had a Sabian endorsement at the time, and I told him later that I was using Zildjians in the studio, but, because I just don't have an elite.
Jimmy,
I know.
How often does that stuff happen? All the time.
Always. Right? I mean, always. But everybody that endorses me knows that the only allegiance I have is to sound.
Right.
I really don't care. And it's not about the economics. I don't care about free shit. I just care that it sounds as good as it can sound. And I've always kind of been that way to a fault. But to answer your question, I mean, it comes down to usable frequencies, right? Without creating bunchiness, was what the Pumpkins call it. We call it bunchiness. It gets bunchy in the mids, it gets bunchy in the highs. We want things carved out.
Yeah.
We want to carve out either a space for ourselves, or we want to have something that allows a carve out to happen. Stick articulation is, you know, the first requirement. And then if you can have air or breath underneath it, that's the whole package. So for me, Elvin Jones, Roy Haynes on Now He Sings, Now He Sobs.
Yeah.
Jim Gordon on Low Spark of High Heel Boys. Tony Williams on One Finger Snap. Those are the holy grail moments for me for ride cymbal, because the ride cymbal, it's the palette I have with the most colors on it. The second one being the snare drum. It comes down to understanding where I'm going to land my plane when I start playing. And then if I know what island I'm taking off from and what island I'm going to land on, the stuff in the middle, the ability to connect the dots becomes a lot easier, because the journey becomes congruent. And I can stitch together the journey most effectively with the ride cymbal. Secondly, I play a lot, and much to the chagrin of modern production, I play a lot of notes on the snare drum.
Yeah.
I play a lot of ghost notes. And, you know, Corgan has come to the realization that the nuance in my playing is really a big part of what we do. The yin and yang of the band is his right hand, my right hand, the vocal, and then the interpretive shading underneath it.
When you said modern production, and you're talking about like things where if you use rolls, like in Tonight Tonight, that has a lot of snare roll things, but modern production, they get away from things like that, ghost notes and stuff like that, right? And it's more of like a backbeat. Is that what you're saying about
hit
that?
The drum in the middle, the same place every time. Like, I never hit the drum in the same place twice.
Right.
And I hit it in the same general area, but
if you're playing a song like Muzzle, for example, that has all those triplet fills in it, right? Are there certain tempos that it's like, yes, in order to have the energy, the tempo of that song is right? If it was any different tempo, you'd have to do a different subdivision. That triplet works perfectly with that tempo.
Yeah, right. Thank you, John Bonham. Right?
Thank you, John Bonham.
Yeah, right. You know, Dazed and Confused, Since I've Been Loving You. Like, you know, those where we learn to play those triplet phrases that are elongated.
Yes.
And I have to credit Jody Stevens from Big Star. I didn't know how to play alternative rock when I joined the Pumpkins. I had no idea. There were a few things that I keyed in on. Stephen Perkins from Jane's, who's a very close friend of mine. But when I heard the Big Star record with Back of a Car, and I heard Jody play those fills, I was like, that's what I've been looking for. And I told him that. I told him when I went to Ardent one time, he was playing a Big Star gig, and he didn't have any cymbals. So I gave him my set of cymbals. I said, here, this is for you. I said, in payment. And he was like, oh, I don't,
nice.
What? I said, yeah, man, come on. You had to know, right? It's like Buddy said, the best musicians are thieves that never get caught. I mean, it wasn't a straight rip, but I mean, that was the impetus for that song, right? I'm not going to deny it. Like when I was so loved that song, and I so loved that #1 record in Radio City, because it taught me so much about the drummer I wanted to be within the context of my band. And I didn't know before that. So I had been playing that song completely differently. And when I heard that song, I came back to practice and I started to incorporate all those Jody fills, and Corgan was like, oh my God, this is so fucking genius. So, you have to be, as we say, you have to be available for the download, and you have to know what the download means.
I would say to drummers when I used to produce, it needs a Jimmy Chamberlin fill here.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, that was a thing. Right. It's like, this needs like a Jimmy Chamberlin part. And I would just reference you all the time.
That makes me so happy.
But it's really hard to write a drum hook, cherub rock, whatever it is, to write something that is instantly recognizable, that announces a song.
If you land where you're supposed to start from,
yep.
When you start to think about a song, when you think about how do I want to feel when this song gets played, the choices you make as an instrumentalist become way different than if you start to think calculously, how can I fit this in here? Or what is this? Like Rocket is a great example. Mm-hmm. The guitar part. Doon doon gown, ding a ding gown, ding goon gown, ding a ding gown. I mean, most drummers just play doon doon god, doon doon goon, doon doon god, doon doon goon. I don't want to hear that.
Right.
I want to hear doon doon god, doon boom boom ba, boom doon god, doon 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 god. Right? You're breaking up something in a way that allows it to start and restart every time.
Yeah.
A lot of times I'll come up with grooves like that, and Billy will be like, but then he'll get to understand it, like why the emotional content of it becomes a vital part of it. In order to do this stuff, two things have to happen. You have to be willing to lose, mm-hmm. and you have to be willing to fail in front of anyone, which is our job. Our job as musicians is to expose ourselves in a way that people are afraid to do. Our job as musicians is to make people feel things. Our job as musicians is to take chances that people normally wouldn't, or anybody in their right mind wouldn't. Our job as musicians is to give people permission to fail as human beings. That's what art is. So you have to be thinking on the balls of your feet in those terms. And as you go down that road enough times, you start to realize that that's where the money is. That's where the learning happens when you see, we're going to play Giant Steps in 5, right? Right? I've been on gigs like that.
Okay.
And you're going to solo first. Like normally you're like, I want to leave now. Mm-hmm. But if you've been around long enough, you're like, it don't matter what happens tonight because I'm going to leave here better than I got here.
Jimmy, I'm trying to think of Giant Steps in 5, what that sounds like right now. You got me distracted because in my head I'm trying to think.
Somewhere I've got a version. Actually, it was in 3.
Okay.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank God it wasn't Evidence in 5. But so the other thing.
Yep.
So that's the main ingredient, I think. The willingness to fail in front of your people who are going to call you names or whatever the humiliation is. You got to get around that. And if you play enough jazz gigs, it's easy to do. You can do it on the bandstand every night. It's like Miles said, I don't want to hear guys not screw up because it tells me they're not going for it.
Right.
You hear him play off-color notes. You hear Herbie make historically documented foibles. But they know that's where the growth happens. That's where the gold is. The other thing is you've got to listen to what's being told to you. And not just in that moment, but like the Allman Brothers, right? I mean, like if you surround yourself with people who live in that world, like Duane Allman, Barry Oakley, like those guys, Jeff Beck, it becomes second nature. Not that those parts are, I'm not trying to diminish my ability to write fun, hooky drum parts. I'm just saying that Those are two necessary things that have to happen before this can even happen.
Right.
Lots of guys, Dave Grohl writes great hooky drum parts. There's a lot of guys, the guy from Sonic Youth. There's a lot of drummers that are under the radar that I love secretly because of that quality.
Yeah.
Like they play shit that's no one else plays.
Right.
It's the inconsistencies in people's playing that attracts me to them, and it allows them to play stuff that's from another universe.
So you have worked a bit in tech outside of your work with Smashing Pumpkins and your other projects, jazz projects you had. Mm-hmm. Billy, I'm going to connect these two things together. Billy said when I interviewed him, a year and a half ago at Blackbird, he said to me, there will be songs that are written by AI, that are songs that people will enjoy. That's coming. And it was very profound the way he said it with such certainty. I have heard some things recently that I think are indistinguishable from, that are totally AI written. Some people that send me stuff all the time, and a lot of times I'm like, yeah, it's kind of lame or whatever. But I've heard some things recently that an average person would have no idea. Not even an average person would have no idea things are written by AI. It was interesting that Billy brought this up kind of before the whole ChatGPT thing came out. And did you guys talk about this stuff with each other at all?
We talked a bit about it. Yeah, I think we land in slightly different places when it comes to that.
What do you think?
I think that it goes back to how you're listening.
Yeah.
When I see people walking down the street, I don't see quantization and digitization. I see analog people stumbling around on the tools they were given.
Well put.
I see analog people making analog choices and analog movements. And I think at some point in Jimmy's world, let's call it,
yep,
teachers will come along and they will teach people the importance of art and how art is consumed. And when you consume art with your heart, and like in meditation, they have this thing where you learn to listen with your whole body. If you listen to music or you analyze a painting with your brain and analytically, you get one piece of it. But the emotional absence will be the death knell of all of that stuff, because once people figure out that really the only thing that sets them apart is nuance and emotion, art will land back in the driver's seat, because the stuff that I'm hearing, it sounds technically okay, but extremely vacant for the way that I listen to music. Mm-hmm. My daughter, Audrey, who is an incredible music fan, much more of a music fan than I ever was, because she'll listen to anything. And she's been listening to these concertos done by this guy who tunes one piano a quarter step down from the other piano and then harmonizes with himself. I listened to about 3 minutes of this stuff and I wanted to shoot myself. I was like, I couldn't. And she's like, isn't it amazing? She's like, you got to just let yourself go. God bless her. She listens to Japanese Vocaloid, but she also loves David Bowie, Carole King, Neil Young. She had all my record collection when she was little. She listened to Earth, Wind and Fire. She's a huge fan. Loves that. Bee Gees, huge Bee Gees fan. So what was interesting about Audrey is, like, I got her record player and I would get her records. And of course I was seeding the storm, right? Curtis Mayfield, Bob Marley. Great stuff, right? At one point, she was listening to Future Shock in her bedroom, and I was like, is this too much? But what was interesting about her is as she got older, she got an iPhone. And then she started to listen to contemporary music, like Imagine Dragons, One Republic, like stuff a 12-year-old girl would listen to.
Yeah.
And when she was listening to it, it would become the background music for whatever else she was doing.
Right.
Like reading. It became the soundtrack for some other digital experience. But when she would drop the needle on the vinyl, she'd lay on her bed and she'd have a 20-minute analog exchange with that record. Because the sine waves are complete, right?
Right.
There's no reassembly going on in the brain. It doesn't become the digital soundtrack versus the digitization of some other digital thing. So I think this stuff, like anything, like the Flowbee or whatever these made-for-TV things are. I think, right? I think we were talking about this morning.
You have to be our age to know
we're
what
going to throw a few of
is.
those out there just to show our age. But
right.
I think this stuff becomes the pet rock. I think eventually
That's another reference that
it becomes, an anomaly. I don't think that I think AI is great for examining, for doing things that are so labor intensive, like examining X-rays, or finding inconsistencies in blood streams or cell replication. Like, for those types of things, AI is great.
Yeah.
For creating Stravinsky symphonies, not so much. I mean, it can approximate that stuff and certainly can draw on all of the ingredients. But as we know, anybody who's read a cookbook and tried to make, Italian pasta sauce, you can do everything it says on the page and it still tastes like shit.
Right.
Which is AI.
Well, it's kind of like you can sit down at Elvin Jones's drum kit.
That's right.
And you can play an Elvin Jones beat.
That's right.
But you ain't going to sound like Elvin Jones.
That's right. And Elvin told somebody, I read in Modern Drummer many years ago, when they were asking him about drum machines.
Yeah.
He said, if you don't want to hear sticks click together, then get a goddamn drum machine. If you want Elvin Jones, you're going to hear some of that stuff. Because he's not, Elvin's just he's playing with his eyes closed.
Okay, Jimmy, can I get you to play a few things here?
Sure.
Cool. Jimmy, Jelly Belly, we talked about it earlier. How do you play this part?
Very carefully. Yeah, this one is a young man's game, as we say in the Pumpkins. But I'll try to show you. The broad strokes of the drum part. We've been playing it live, and it's such a fun ride. When you can relax into it, and you've got some seat time with it, it becomes fun. But at the first couple shows, it's a bit of one of these, like it is for this, right? So this is it.
That is insane.
Right?
That is insane.
I mean, who would write that?
Who would write that?
That's what I'm thinking. Like halfway through, like.
What's amazing is how well it fits with the guitar parts too. How they fit together perfectly.
Thanks.
Wow. So there's a bunch of questions I have on it that now seeing it. So you play on so many different parts of the ride cymbal, first of all, for different tones. And when you hit the bell, you don't hit the bell. That bell isn't an obnoxious bell.
No, this is actually a crash cymbal. This is actually an Epoch 20-inch crash.
But you got some moon gel on it to really dry it out.
Just for today. Sometimes I leave it wide open. Okay. But I played this one night not knowing, it didn't say crash cymbal on it.
Yeah.
And then Scott Lykin from Istanbul said, that's a big crash cymbal. And I said, man, I just love it because I love, this part of it. The fact that this isn't not super pingy.
No, not at all.
So, I mean, in the ride, I play a lot of ride notes, right? In the da, 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 da. That's a.
Jimmy, when you're doing some of those rolls, those are a couple times you'll do single stroke rolls, but a lot of them you're doing doubles and things like that, right?
Now I am. I used to do those all as single strokes because my doubles weren't as effective, so it was a lot. But now I'm more of the Dennis Chambers.
Right. Right. Much more economical.
Well, yeah, I mean, and because my doubles are a lot better than they were in 1994 or 5, whenever we recorded that.
Yeah.
And that's, to your point of practicing, you're never kind of done. You can always work on stuff.
There's almost no hi-hats other than little accents in that.
Yeah, just a couple scoops.
Yeah. Right. This is really a ride cymbal. So that's why I was asking you about the ride cymbals, because you have songs like that are. A lot of them are, it's just
because during the verse, you can tighten it up. And then in the chorus, I mean, like I said, the ride cymbal is kind of my paintbrush in this band.
Okay, how did you do the kick drum by itself without the double pedal back then?
That I couldn't tell you, so. But that was, one take in the morning and then you're kind of done.
Man.
Yeah, it's tough. It's hard to do live. And with consistency, right? So live, I'm trying to, somewhat replicate the part, not create, adoring fans of bass drum players.
Right. Okay, so take a song like Cherubrock, which is another signature drum part. So that one, like what was the genesis for that?
So Butch and I had a conversation about this where he thought but I always thought it should be a conversation between the hi-hat and the ride cymbal, right? So do it.
Jimmy, when you do those da 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 da, they're so even and they sound. This is from just practicing this stuff. They're so powerful. Da 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 da, just with one hand. Yes.
Yeah, I play a lot. I can hear the difference between. There's a little more intensity in it doing
with one hand. Yes.
You know, it's like down picking as opposed to. It's like down picking instead of down and up picking.
That's exactly the analogy I was going to make right there. Yes.
Yeah. So if you see James Hetfield,
right, those downstrokes,
who I'm in awe of.
Oh my God, his parts! I don't know how he plays them.
Yeah, but it's so clean, right?
So clean. Oh my God, it's unbelievable.
And then you see guys trying to do that stuff where they're down and up picking, and it's not even the same song.
No.
So I do a lot of things with my left hand. I had broken my wrist while I was in a kind of a deep practice phase playing football. I think it was in 8th grade. Mm-hmm. So I practiced a whole summer with my right arm in a cast. I would just stick the stick in here so I could play like this, but I got to be a pretty left-hand heavy hitter.
What's another drum part that was different than, like something that Billy would have imagined? Or what's something that he would play something you're like, oh, well, I think it should be more like this.
Like Silverfuck is a great example,
yes.
right? So the guitar goes wan-do-do-wan-do-do-wan-do-do-wan-do-do-wan. So normally, drum. But I had always had this kind of idea to do this kind of Alan Dawson-ish, kind of Tony Williams, like that stuff, in a groove. So I had this kind of counterpoint. So he was going, wan-do-do-wan, and I was going, do-do-do-do-do-do-do. And then the rest of the fill was... So that's one.
Jimmy, you could only come up with parts like that if you listen to jazz and fusion.
Yeah.
Really.
Right. So, there's a lot of Lenny White. Cobham,
yes, exactly.
But mostly really like Takian on rock stuff. Tony was my guy. I mean, Tony was when I first heard Believe It, that Lifetime record. Like I told you, my band when I was 14, we were covering Snake Oil.
Okay, wait, so the yellow drums?
Yeah,
that's it, right?
A lot of those kind of early grooves, like the beginning of Tristessa, like that stuff. Sure, it all came from Tony, And then when you talk about how do you play rudiments within the context of live, we had this song United States, right? And I was trying to figure out this kind of Fela-esque drum pattern for it. And where I landed, I just realized it's just a double paradiddle in 6/8, right? It's got a 6/8 double paradiddle feel in 4/4.
I noticed another thing, Jimmy, is that you use different parts of the drum for different accents.
Yes.
You don't play in the center all the time like you were talking about.
No.
Because there's tonal differences. Can you demonstrate?
So when I do a roll I'll tend to lean on the rim.
Yes. Okay, demonstrate that where you're playing more in the center of the...
Right?
See, if you don't hear the difference between those things, I mean, it's so...
One's a lumbering bed '70s drum part,
Right.
and the other one's, you know, timbali-esque.
Yes, and really intense when you're hitting, when you're using the rims or playing close to the edge of the drum.
I mean, I love the rims of these, you know, these triple flange hoops like we were talking about with the Superphonics. I mean, you can really lean into them. I mean, these snares. So
another thing that I noticed, I knew this about yours, is that you don't bash the cymbals.
No.
Talk about this, because I think it's a really important thing for drummers about self-mixing.
There's a spot with every instrument, as you know. So if you take your Les Paul and you jack your E chord, 3 or 4 of your strings are going to be out of tune.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
The open ones. You know, drums have a point, like a choke point, we call it. These sound good. The harder you hit it, you start to lose some of that.
Yes.
Cymbals for me, like the whole Shiny to Know So Bright tour we did, I use very light sticks. Like I use these Maple MJ4, they're jazz sticks. Most people think they're too light to play rock with. I didn't even break a stick in 2018 in 2 months tour. I mean, I've chipped the tips, but I would never break a stick. I think it's just, you know, proper technique. And once you realize, again, listening, what do I want from my cymbals? Where's my high dynamic? And then I'm going to adjust my baseline dynamic down so my low dynamic is more.
Jimmy, do you use the tips of those are very rounded, these jazz sticks like that. Now, do you use the Emperors so you don't dimple the heads?
No.
Or no, you just like the tone of that?
I just like
Do you
the
like
tone.
the feel of having the rounded bead as opposed to more of a you know, do you like the feel of it on the cymbal?
I think so.
Do you have more control over the tone?
Yeah, although it's a tool, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not married to anything. I mean, when I played straight ahead stuff, I'll use like the American Classic AJ4s, which are really thin, because I want to be able to play a big ride cymbal without it getting away from me.
Yeah.
You know, I talked to Brian Blade about this when I was having trouble finding a dark enough cymbal. I had emailed him and said, hey, what are you using on the Chick Trio stuff, right? Because the fucking cymbal is what I wanted.
Yeah.
And he said, oh, I'm using a 1954K, right? Currently chained to my wrist, right?
Yes.
So, you know, I'm always looking for, you know, and sometimes when I'm playing with Frank Catalano or even with Moeller, like we're playing rooms where the person in the front row is like 2 feet from my bass drum. You know, you don't want the drums getting away from you. So sometimes I'll use those smaller sticks. The thing about like sticks, cymbal articulation has a lot to do with the grain structure and the way you hold them, right? So this, like, the sound is traveling up the stick and getting choked in my hand, right?
Right.
So if I let go, now I'm playing like Moeller. So, you know, playing correctly allows you to get the full dynamic range out of your instruments. You know, it's like the right pick. You know, when you're playing like with one of those heavy little picks that everybody played with
like
in
a
the
Jazz 3 or something. Yeah, right.
Right. that I used to find on my parents' basement floor after a jam sessions. You get a different sound. For these drums, these sticks really work. They don't eat up a lot of low end out of the cymbals, which I really like. But again, hickory will give you a little bit more pingy sound, which I don't like. Again, it's just preference. And I like the way these darken the snare up. I've got a little bit of gel on here right now, but that's generally how I have my stick.
God, that sounds great.
Yeah, I mean, and all these drums, I mean, you got to give, it's hard enough to sound good without, trying to create, disadvantages. I mean, you're a guitar player. It's guitar is like, it's all done with this, right?
Yeah.
Knobs and being able to play the strings correctly. This stuff is really more about an analog. Like, how are you going to...
How do you pull the sound out of the drums?
Yeah, right. And toms, too. I mean, like, dynamic range of toms within a pattern... like that, I always want to leave myself somewhere to go, some headroom, right? So I can play things that imply a heaviness without having to have the dynamic volume because of my note choices and the way I'm managing dynamics within the context of the phrase, which goes back to Jim Gordon, right? Those fills would come out of nowhere. I mean, he was so good at if you listen to like the Nilsson Schmilsson.
Oh yeah.
Right, where it's him and Keltner.
Yeah.
Or Low Spark, or the Gordon Lightfoot, or some of my favorite stuff is like the Seals and Crofts, like Summer Breeze, Hummingbird.
Amazing.
I mean,
those are some of the best sounding records too.
Yeah.
Everything.
But it really, you're talking about arguably what most technologists today would call old vintage instruments.
Yeah.
But the ability to capture the nuance was really like Hal Blaine, Gordon, Keltner, the Mad Dogs, that stuff. It was about the way they, like we all did, we learned how to get our voice heard within the limitations of the environment we were in, right? And if our drums sounded like Quaker Oats boxes, we were going to play stuff that was conducive to those Quaker Oats boxes being heard, right?
Yeah. When I interviewed Billy, we talked about Tonight, and he talked about how he just had this chord progression he kept playing over and over, and it was up higher on the neck, and it just didn't go anywhere. Then all of a sudden he did it down where it's played there, and he's like, oh, and then he was able to kind of come up with the ideas for the song. Now, the drum part on there, though, is super interesting that you've got the snare roll going on with the orchestra. Is that the first thing that came to mind for you?
I think so. I don't remember ever playing anything else.
Okay.
I knew I was going to go to halftime in the chorus.
The chorus, yeah.
Bum, ba, bum, ba, bum. And then when the finger picky part came out, the do da do do da do 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 da do do da, I knew that the Birdland groove was going to work there, right? So it was like
Birdland groove.
which I always wanted to go. So that was, I always had...
If anyone doesn't know the Birdland groove,
right?
Look it up.
Right. So we know all of that. Alex Acuna, I mean, I love that Heavy Weather record. I mean,
yes.
It was part of my canon.
I saw that tour. I actually saw them play then.
Wow.
Eastman Theater.
You should read Peter's book, Erskine's book. If you're going to interview him, read the book first. It's an inside look at Weather Report that you're not going to get from, you wouldn't get from Zawinul now, but you would have never gotten from anybody else. It's pretty interesting because he was there, Alphonse Johnson and then Jocko, and then the confrontation between Jaco and Zawinul, and he was kind of in the middle of it. He had a pretty interesting vantage point.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I knew, and I think I've told this story before, but I had those first 2 Gino Vanelli records.
Oh, man.
Remember, so Storm at Sunup and Just to the Gemini, right?
Yes.
With Graham Lear on drums?
Yes.
They had that To the War suite on one of them. I think Just to the Gemini had that first To the War. And I always loved Graham Lear. And I went to see Gino twice because of those 2 records. And once before he'd gotten I Just Want to Stop Huge, but once after where it was like me and like 10,000 housewives. But just the second time was Mark Craney, I think, on drums, right? Who's another Gino's a great drummer. And the drummer he's got now, I can't remember the guy, the Canadian guy, is ridiculous.
Yeah.
I can't, like hold my beer, ridiculous. And again, like getting back to the way I assimilated music, it was more about the way it felt, you know? And Graham did something like this. In that song, and I always thought that, like, for something as enunciatory as Tonight Tonight, that was kind of I wanted galloping, war, colonial, so. So all those parts kind of came together in that one afternoon or whenever we arranged that song. And I could be wrong, but you know, Billy and I have really pretty damn good memories about what happened, and sometimes we'll have different versions of it. He'll tell you that my memory is pretty deadly. My memory for like any song we've ever played or when we played it is pretty good. So my recollection of that is that between what he was looking for and what I had in my back pocket, we kind of landed there, right?
I mean, it's really unique because it has 3 very distinct
scene changes, right?
Yeah, scene changes.
Yeah,
that's a good way of putting it.
And we were always looking for, like, if a song was party like that, and it really had 3 kind of landing zones, if you will, like. What was the demarcation zone, right? Like where does one stop and one end, and how do we elegantly affix them to each other in a way that is part of a bigger story? Because you've got 3 stories within a story musically, but then the lyrics on top kind of weave it together. And sometimes, you know, as an arranger or whatever, you'll key in on something like the guitar part or the lyric or the strings, and you can say, okay, the strings are going to they're going to let me off the hook to a certain extent to allow me the liberty or the latitude to do something a little bit more unconventional, right? Because normally in a big pop song like that, you would be like, drive the car down the middle and don't hit the shoulder or any cones, you know? I mean,
right.
Because you're not just playing with your house money, you're playing with everybody's money, right?
Yeah.
So you want to be responsible about it. But you still want to be able to take the chance of making something that's novel, you know, like Tom Sawyer, or Rush, you know, something that Spirit of the Radio, right? Like what would that song sound like if it was recorded in Nashville tomorrow, right? Like it would be like, yeah, right. So you want to be able to be in the spirit of the composition, but also be able to express yourself in a way that, you know, makes you feel like you don't have this kind of quasi-internal sellout going on. I mean, Billy will tell you, like, he can tell when I don't like playing something, you know? He's just like, oh, no, that's not going to work. I'm like, but that's what you want, right? He's like, yeah, but I can tell you don't like it. Like, you know, so fair enough. I mean, because we both have pretty good intuition.
Well, this is amazing.
Yeah, drums are fun. I mean,
drums are fun. That was a great demonstration. I didn't expect you to play all of Jelly Belly. I love that.
Once you're in, you ain't getting out.
I know. I was thinking, like, where's he going to stop? Oh, he's going to play the whole thing. Yes. I'd like to once again thank Jimmy for being my guest today. Leave a comment. Let me know your thoughts. Hit the subscribe button. Thanks for watching.